So welcome back. So we're going to be talking about making snares, and because of course before we can go get set any snares or tapaguana for so any beaver snares, we're going to have to learn how to make snares, because we can't just go out and use wapos tapaguan, because those are rabbit snares, just a tiny little snare. So we got to make sure we make proper snares. So this here is the size of wire we'd be using, and when we're setting for a beaver snare, we're setting the snare probably about this big, so just about as big as my head, and that's where we're going to be setting for a beaver. We put this in on special places in around the beaver dam, and we'll learn about that when we do get out into the bush. But for now, we're just learning about the snares. So with the snares, there are three major parts to a snare. That's of course the wire, and this is special stainless steel wire, and this is actually 1/16 wire. So if you're setting for beaver, it's the same wire that you'd use for coyote or lynx, and it's called 1/16 snare wire, and you'll see that it's not too thick, it's kind of flexible, but it's very, very strong because it's braided stainless steel wire, and it's going to be really strong, and our beaver is not going to be able to break it or escape with the wire on it. So of course that's the main component, is your wire. So again, you want to use at least the 1/16 stainless steel wire, just because of the flexibility and the ease of the smoothness that the snare moves in. The other major component on the snare, of course, is the lock or the choker. So this is just the choker here. I'll get one. So this is the one we use for the beaver, and it's a number 5 choker. And you see how it works, so that on the wire, when we have it on here, it slides one way, so it's sliding when it's closing, but if it tries to go the other way, it locks in place, and you can see there's little teeth on there that lock against the wire, and that, so when it tightens up, it's a locker. It's not going to be able to slide back. There's no way that the beaver can go in there and then get his neck out of there, because it has completely locked in there with those teeth, so it's not going anywhere. So this locker only slides one way, and to release it, of course, you just push it up and it releases. So again, on the bigger one, you could see the teeth on there and how it moves. The wire locks, and then we just give this a little push that way, and you see those teeth release, and then the wire can slide through. So that is the locker or the choker mechanism. This one here is a number 8 size. This is a number 5 size. This is a size, we'd use a number 5 locker or choker for beaver snares, just because of the size of the wire. This, if we use this on a smaller wire, like the 1/16 gauge, then it's not going to lock. It doesn't close far enough to close tight on the 1/16. So number 5 locker for the 1/16 wire. So again, so far we've got our wire, we've got our locker or our choker, and the other part on it is these that are called furls. So these little furls are made of aluminum, and they're kind of not such a hard steel, because we want to be able to put the wire in there and crimp it together, and that's what holds the wire in shape and holds everything securely. So those are the wire, the choker or locker, and the furl. Those are your locking furls. And with the furls, I'll show you how we'll be doing that. We just put the wires in there and then crimp it tight to lock it in there. So you'll see I've got one furl there, and then one furl on the other end, to where that's going to be where I'm going to put my wire to secure my snare out in the bush. So again, the main parts, we've got the wire, we've got the choker or locker, and we've got 2 ferrules. So I'm going to bring out all of the equipment that we need to make a snare, and I'm going to show you how to make a snare. So again, we've got the wire, and you can buy the wire in big rolls. Just so you can see a little bit easier today, I've decided to use the 1/8 wire, the little bigger wire, just because it's going to be easier to see. However, when you're doing it with like the 1/16 wire, the thinner wire that we use for the Beaver snares or the coyote snares, exactly the same process in making both kind of snares. So we have our wire, we have a 1/8 choker or locker, and just like the other, we've got 2 ferrules. So those are the pieces I need. Now for a Beaver snare, I'm just going to be cutting as much wire as I need. For a Beaver snare, you generally need just over an arm length. Or with me, I like to go the length of my arm from my outer armpit. So I'm going from the whole length of my arm to this armpit up here. That's how much wire I need. So I know I need to cut this wire here. Now how am I going to cut that wire? If you try and use something like a wire cutter, because this is stainless steel cable, it's nearly impossible to be cutting with a wire cutter. In fact, about the only way you could cut this is either with a grinding tool or a file. A lot of people use a file, but it tends to get messy because the wires get frayed, and it takes a fair bit of time just to cut it with a file. So I've got my Dremel rotary tool here. I've got my Dremel rotary tool here, as well as a cutting bit, a metal cutting bit on it, a disc. And I'm just going to cut that wire using that, because it's going to make a clean cut and it's not going to fray my edges. The last thing you want to do is fray these edges, because the snare will be impossible to use. So it's going to get a little bit loud while I cut that wire. And I'm just going to start my rotary tool here, and then I'm just going to cut that wire by pushing down on this. And you'll see how easily that cut it. So I've got my length of wire here, and this end is still a little hot, so you don't want to touch it right yet, but it's a little hot. It's already cooled down, but the biggest thing is you'll see here it didn't get all frayed. If it were to get frayed here, it'd be nearly impossible to get my ferrules on or my lock and choke. So I don't need this anymore. I've got my wire length. So the first thing I want to do is make my securing end. So again, I'll get the snare that we had from before. And if you're just starting, I suggest you start just by learning how to use a ferrule first. So we're just going to make this end on my new snare. So I'll do that by taking my ferrule and I'll put it through one side, and then I'm just going to bend this wire over and stick it back through the second hole on the ferrule. And hopefully you can see that until I've got both ends of that in the ferrule. Now of course it doesn't need to be this end, but all I do is pull on one side, the longer side of my wire, and sort of close off that ferrule till I get about the right size loop. Now when you've got your ferrule in place, you want to make sure it's secured. And the only way we could secure that is by crimping that. And by crimping that, we're going to get a hard metal end. I've just got an axe here and a hammer. So an axe and a hammer. Now some people would use, say they do sell a crimping tool, but a lot of those tools are really expensive and a lot of us don't have them. Some people would use a vice grip and just crimp that. I like to use just a hammer and something to hit it on. So again, I'm going to make sure it's placed proper first. Once it's in place, I hit it and it's locked in place. So that's not going to go anywhere. And with my snares, what I like to do later is even after I finished making the snare, I go back and I double check all of my furls and just give them an extra tap. Just to make sure that they're completely locked in place. And because these are aluminum furls, it really grips onto the wire. So that's not going to go anywhere. So now I've got to make the other end of my snare, which is this end. So the first thing that I'm going to do, of course, is I want to make sure that my wire is going to be going on there, on my locker. So with my locker, remember, I want to make sure my snare is able to move this, my locker is able to move from, so this is my securing end over here, that's over here. I want to make sure my locker can move from my left, from my right to my left, sorry. So it's moving here easily, but if I try and go back the other way, it locks. So that's what I want my snare to be doing. So once this is attached here, it will slide freely this way, but as soon as it tries to go back, it locks. Slide free, lock. Slide free, lock. So when you're putting on your locker, make sure you practice that a bit so that you know that you're getting it right. So slide free, lock. Slide free, lock. So I know that that's the way my snare is going to go. So now I could take this end and stick it through my locker. The reason I like doing it this way is there's no way you can mess up. If you leave this out later and then try and stick your snare on later, a lot of times you're going to find that you've accidentally put your locker the wrong way, and then you're going to have to start all over again. So this, I know already, even before my furl is on, it's the right way. It's going to lock. So you see I've got the perfect size there for my beaver. Like I said, about the size of my head. I've got just enough wire here to go to my securing end. But now I've got to secure my locker on there. So when we're securing the locker, we got to remember that we want this locker to move fairly freely. So we place it somewhere on the wire where we know it's going to be moving freely without catching. So let me put it that way where you can see it a little better. So I'm just kind of judging how it's going to be moving there. Now this, very important, where my locker is placed now, I want to make sure it stays in that position while I bend this wire, ready to take the other furl. So I'm just bending that wire in place for now. I'm not putting no furl on yet, because remember, I'm still just judging where my locker is going to go. So now that I know my locker will go there, I can go ahead, put my furl on the one side, slide it down, and now I've got my furl there ready to lock. So again, I put my wire back in, bend this. I've already kind of lined it up to where it's going to go. And I'm going to slide it into this other furl here. So even before I go ahead and lock this furl in place, I'm going to kind of move the snare around to the point where this is going to be in place, where it's going to move freely ahead but lock going back. Very important before you lock it, because you'll see if you move this furl at an awkward angle, then my snare is not sliding anyway at all. It's not able to slide forward, it's not able to slide back. That's just by adjusting this furl that holds that choker in place. So now I've got it in place. Now look, it's moving freely forward, super freely forward, easily, and then locking in place, doing what it's supposed to do. So now I don't want to try and move this around because that furl has been put in place. I just want to hit that furl exactly where it's at without moving it away from its position. So now it's locked in place, and my snare should slide ahead and lock. Yeah, that's moving perfectly. So when I'm setting my snare out in the bush, again, I set about the size of my head, and now I'm going to move it to that size, and I'm just going to kind of move this down so it locks in place at the size I want it. So if I were setting this in the bush now, I just set it to where I want it to, then I tap this to kind of lock it in place. Now I could set this snare in the bush, and when an animal does come, it'll go into there, and this still moves forward freely, but locks trying to go back. So that's working correctly. So that is how we make a snare.